Hey, 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 sports fans. Was not exactly sure how that beat was gonna drop, if it was gonna be the same with the headsets. Not gonna lie, just wanted to take this show with the headsets on real quick, see how it sound. Might ask why I still got the mic. You got to hear a little bit more. Rudy, your host on Browns Only. Today, we're gonna talk about some guys that likely are going to get dropped off for the Browns this offseason. Unfortunately, as they cut down to that final 53, after that last preseason game, there's definitely, in that cut down from 90 to 53, some guys that will be in jeopardy of not making the squad, likely because there's a log jam at that position, meaning it's just a little bit too deep, or as my famous father had previously said, "Oh no, it's just too many of y'all for the house." He said it pretty much something just like that. I've heard I resemble him. He was a handsome guy. Shout out to my dad, who's the biggest Browns fans I know. Before I get too emotional on this episode, we are again talking about guys that may not make the Browns active roster this year. But first, a little bit of Browns news because this is Browns only. We got to give you the latest things that are going on. A lot of times, not only with the Browns, but around Cleveland sports, period. We know LeBron hasn't signed with anybody yet. Still waiting to see what goes on there. But Ethan Posick did sign, not with the Browns, as some people suspected, but he did actually sign with the Ravens. So he was cleared to come back to practice this past week. Shortly after that, we know that in earlier in the offseason, Linderbaum went to the Raiders signed a big deal there to go and play for them as the highest paid center ever. So they did have a void there, and Ethan Posick will go play for the Ravens. Now, somebody asked me, is that a good move for the Ravens? Will he, help that Ravens offensive line? Quite possible that he will. However, I just don't know at this point, even though he was always pretty solid for us, what you'll get, especially with him coming back from that Achilles. Um, Not a whole bunch else I really wanted to touch on in terms of recent Browns news. I feel like there was at least one other thing. Of course, the update on LeBron. We're all keeping eyes on that. Again, the recent move, Ethan Posick going and signing with the Ravens. So, in division signing, that's obviously not going to help at all. There was a couple other things I just wanted to react to. I would say like some quotes. One was our buddy Mary Kay Cabot again. Um, she was in the news this week recently reporting that Jerry Judy will still be the number one receiver for the Browns this upcoming season. I think that that goes back to a lot of the stuff that the media has been saying, to where it is, I would say, somewhat obvious. However, it is also not a guarantee, right? It's also not under media control, right? So it's not, they don't have the final say on that. That's going to be whether it's, you look at Monken, obviously have the receivers coach, who was, elevated, I believe, in a holdover, from the previous Brown staff. So he's going to look to get that receiving core together. But don't forget, you got a young Isaiah Bond who's returning. Last year didn't get a chance to really get involved as much in a lot of the offseason stuff, because you know how he came in undrafted, signed late in camp, really. And then, of course, you have the two draft picks from this most recent draft. Casey Concepcion, our first round draft pick. Again, refer to him as a guy you just want to get the ball in his hands and let him get a lot of yards, after the catch, right? And then Denzel Boston, who's a big red zone target at 6'4", 220 plus, with 12 touchdowns last year out of Washington, right? So you got the competition there from those three young guys. Don't know about guys after that, like Cedric Tillman, whether he'll make the roster. Ooh, maybe that's a uh, little preview of something that's coming up, right? But guys like that, obviously Jamari Thrash, gonna be tough for him to. I'm going right down the list. That wasn't on purpose there. It's going to be tough for them to make the position, much less like Corley, right? Malachi Corley as well. Great job with the end around, the slot reverses, basically the jet sweep action, in Kevin Stefanski's offense last year. But this ain't that. We could still use guys that have that skill set though, right? Because you got to think that that's going to be something that Monken's going to look to lean on a lot, especially because of kind of how they use whether it's Zay Flowers or guys like that in the past, in his offense. So that'll be very interesting to see how that plays out. If you ask me, would Jerry Judy have the most targets out of the receivers at the end of the season? I would say that that's likely, but I would say, will he have the most catches out of the receivers? And again, not including Harold Fannin. And I think that that is pretty unlikely. I think that one of those young guys, and probably not Bond, because I could definitely look for Bond to have still a high yard per catch average. But at the same time, I don't think he's going to be like a volume receiver, especially in this offense this year. Look for either Boston or Concepcion to take over that number one spot before the end of the year. So I disagree with you on that one, MKC. Again, if I want to get my Browns updates, I'll probably go to MGK before I go to MKC. But that's just me. I don't know if I'm rhyming, sounding like DMX with all the acronyms. But we're gonna keep, it is the dog. Roof, roof, roof. Like I said, we represent the dog pound. There's another quote I wanted to touch on. Now, this is somebody to me a little bit more respected in the media, even though again, I give Mary Kate Cabot a hard time, but she's actually very well respected in the media circles and in Cleveland, local sports news, as she should be. I think don't have to agree with everything she says, but Lance Risland, usually a guy who I kind of agree with most of his points. I disagree with you here, Lance, on the take that he had about Dylan. We'll be talking about quarterback on today's show, but not what you think, right? Not necessarily 12 or 2, not talking about Shador as much, but this quote is about Dylan Gabriel. And what Lance Risland had to say about Dylan Gabriel was to say Dylan Gabriel has no chance to even compete before the pads come on. And it's only about a week away, thank God. Before the pads come on with the new head coach, with the new offensive coordinator, just makes no sense to me. So let's break down that quote. He said to say Dylan Gabriel has no chance to even compete before the pads come on. Who said he couldn't compete? Look, we're out there and we seen what was going on in camp, the amount of snaps, the amount of attempts that Dylan Gabriel was getting. I mean, he was getting more snaps than Taylor Green, right? But at the same time, I mean, it is that it is. When you look at the stature of Dylan Gabriel, I don't have to point out, what some of his flaws are in terms of arm strength, but the pads will come on. And we have seen recently workout videos that came out with Deshaun, Derek, and Shador throwing back to back, right? There was no Dylan. When Monken talks about it's a two-man race. When Jared Verse says we have two elite quarterbacks, that's what Jared Verse says. Don't get on me about that. Don't come to me. You can drop something in the chat if you want. In fact, there's so many ways to get at me. You could put something in the chat right there. I'll even take calls at 937-355-2137 live on the show. If you want to do that, we can do it. I'll let you get a question in. I'll let you debate with me however you want to do it. But don't forget, Big Root Promotions and Entertainment brings you this show. So you can also contribute to Dollar Master Yoda 1980 Cash App. But I will tell you that Dylan Gabriel is not in the competition for the starting quarterback for the Browns. And Lance Risland, while I respect your coaching and football acumen, I disagree with you heavily that Dylan Gabriel should not be counted out. What is true is Dylan Gabriel will only have a chance on this roster to start if unfortunately both or either Shador or Derek gets hurt. If one of them is named the starter, and likely he would be third behind them until the point in which Taylor Green has somehow got enough snaps through the preseason on and on the practice squad to where Monkey feels a little bit more comfortable with him running some semblance of an abbreviated version of this offense, right? So that's basically how it goes. You can look at I think it's more likely that Taylor Green will surpass Dylan Gabriel as 3 before Dylan Gabriel will surpass even Deshaun or Derek, who I'm putting in the backup role, right? That's how I've had it slotted in the whole time. I haven't seen anything to contradict it. In fact, MKC, the most interesting thing she reported to me throughout this whole quarterback battle or throughout everything was the slip that she had in one interview. I think it was on 92.3, where she said that Derek might be suffering from a little bit of soreness in his arm, and she kind of walked it back. She said, "Well, maybe not. I'm just inferring. Nah, you knew something. You knew something, and you just didn't mean to say that." And that's fine and everything. And arm soreness is not. It's not nothing crazy at camp, right? Like it's the time between the off season OTA activities and actual training camp. So if guys are resting their bodies, having maybe some soreness and hamstrings, whatever, it's time to rest the body. But you see Shador and Derek is still out there working. It's not that Dylan's not somewhere working, but we seen earlier in the offseason when Shador was there bringing his coach a horsehead, for example. Dylan was in Hawaii. We won't say chilling. Again, I'm sure he's working as well. But let's get to the main thing we wanted to cover on today's show was this some guys that are likely going to get dropped off, as this offseason progresses. And again, as we get to the last preseason games, and when the Browns finish the last preseason game, I think it's about August 30th. Don't quote me on that, but it's the end of August. So right after the last preseason game, teams will have to cut down from the 90 to the 53 man roster. And so in the future show, I'll go ahead and give you a projected roster of what you can expect for what's now like the end of is that next month? Yeah, right. So we're at the almost the end of July already. This year has flew past. But the first names, really, I've already touched on. They're at the same position. Tillman, I don't know what to tell you. I mean, Cedric, it looked like you had some promise. And especially, I think it was the end of I want to say the 23 season. He came on at some point. He was injured to end the season, but he had a streak where he had like some really nice games in a row before he got injured. He's missed some time with concussions, and that's been something that's plagued his career a bit. Is injuries. Cedric Tillman, the former third round pick out of Tennessee. Um, I can't say that he has or has not lived up to a third round pick, right? Because it's not like he's a first round pick. You can't say he's a bust, but he's not going above that. You can correct me if I'm wrong. I didn't look it up, but he is not going above 40 receptions. I don't believe he might have been right at it in his career yet. And I want to say 3 years, right? He's going into his fourth year. And so he hasn't outplayed that third round draft position. But then again, I mean, he's not a non-contributor, right? So there's things he can do. He can block, right, in the run game, which Monken's gonna run the ball. I mean, I don't care what you say, right? Schweitzer, he's offensive lineman, I believe. Offensively, I think these guys were brought in from Baltimore. If you look, they use a lot of. We talked about personnel before, right? To where if you say like 21 personnel or 22 personnel, meaning they have two backs in the backfield because that first number is the running back, that indicates that you want to run the ball. Now, again, I believe they came here to run the ball. Cedric Tillman could help in that avenue, and I believe he could easily slot in, still make the roster as the fifth receiver behind the guys we mentioned earlier, Bond, Concepcion, Judy, Boston, right? So he could be the fifth, but it's just as likely that they could appreciate the skill set of like a Corley, a Tylan Wallace, and even a Thrash that will make the roster ahead of Tillman. Now, Thrash is a guy I had down that list a little bit, right? He was a draft pick. I believe he'd be going to his third year out of Louisville. He was a fifth round draft pick. So again, a holdover from the previous staff, just like Tillman, right? So a guy like Tylan Wallace, who came with Monken from Baltimore and can also give you contribution on special teams, you can see how he would add somebody like Tillman or Thrash out who don't have that kind of versatility. Now Thrash is a bit of an undersized. I mean, he's 6 foot, right? But he's not a big guy, 6 foot. Maybe he's 180. He's more of a you can't say he's a possession receiver, right? Because again, he's not a big guy, but he's not really a threat to go anywhere after the catch. That's why I'm so glad to see a guy like Concepcion to come here that's got that ability, his capability, that ability to run with the ball after he gets the ball in space and be very dangerous that way. It's all about staying dangerous out here sometimes on them. You got to keep them guessing, you got to keep them on their toes. They can't just anticipate your every move or what we doing? And that's kind of James Thrash. He's catching the ball, he's running his 10-yard comeback or whatnot. He might run a flag every now and then, or he might try to even get in a double move. I don't think he's particularly fast. I would say best case he probably runs like a 4.6 or something like that. Maybe like a 4.5. But other than again catching those basic 10, 15-yard routes, we haven't seen a lot from him. Again, he hasn't, I don't believe, surpassed say 15 catches in a year in his first couple seasons in the league. So again, it'd be tough for him to make this 53-man roster, especially with the two rookies and again, somewhat of a logjam at the position. So that's what is really a challenge or a detriment to somebody, making the roster, right? Is one of those situations and like that. Where you have it too, where the positions just got a lot of guys there, and you find yourself, with the coaching change, like in this case, maybe being the odd man out. And so that's what this show is really all about. So we got those two guys at the receiver position. We're gonna have more than five guys. This five guys was how he came into it. Five guys that might not make the 53, but it's like five guys burgers. I don't know. It's just more than five. All right. But anyway, Zach Center as offensive lineman, obviously out of Michigan. The Browns drafted same draft as Michael Hall Jr. I want to say that was about 3 years ago. I was at the damn draft. I should remember how long ago it was, but time does run us together. And so Zinter has not been able to latch on as a he'd say like a consistent starter for the Browns, right? Even though he's been, you could almost say a priority backup. Remember, one of the main reasons the Browns were able to draft him in the third round is because he had a broken leg. His senior, I think it was his senior year coming out of Michigan. So he dropped in that draft a little bit as he had to recover, his rookie season in coming into the league. Both him and Michael Hall Jr. have been kind of disappointments. And so I keep this. I keep kind of doing the little foreshadowing, right? Giving you a little, little nugget of what's coming next. But so far, we got Cedric Tillman. He may or may not make this, 53 routes. I think he could be, a trade candidate. So people more say Jerry Judy. Jerry Judy, he could get traded. Obviously, Jerry Judy's got a little bit more trade value than Cedric Tillman. Cedric Tillman's still on his rookie deal. It's a little bit more friendly financially. It'd be hard for the Browns to maybe get anything, earlier in the draft than a fifth round pick, say. But that might be something that's feasible if you think you're going to cut him anyway. Again, Jamari Thrash, he was a fifth round pick out of Louisville, and I would say that it is quite likely that Thrash will not make the 53. Again, Tillman Definitely could. Thrash definitely could still be potential for the practice squad. He was released at some point by the Browns last year, and that was even by the previous regime. But obviously, he was required. Zach Zinter was the third guy. Again, offensive guard center out of Michigan. Hasn't been able to really latch on as a every down player, as a every game starter for the Browns, or even like their sixth offensive lineman. But I mean, he's somewhat of that. He's not that anymore now. Obviously, we talked about the line additions quite a bit throughout this offseason. For that same reason, Luke Wimpler is a guy because of like the draft picks of, we've went through them ad nauseum. Brailsford, Barber, Fauno, obviously, in the first round. The offensive tackle, the left tackle out of Utah is going to be starting at left tackle, but like Barber, for example, and Brailsford to provide depth might edge out Wimpler. They might edge out Center. They might edge out Dewan Jones. And Dewan Jones is the fifth guy who will struggles to make this roster. He did basically take a salary reduction, right, down to about 1 million. And I think they turned it into a bonus for this year, saved the team a little bit of money. But he said Dewan Jones is a big man, and he said, like a cowboy, I want my money now, boy. What? All right. But they turned it into a bonus that's also called an AB special, an Andrew Berry haircut. I give you number one real quick too. I ain't gonna play around with you. Neither will Dewan Jones because he's a large man. They used to call him Big Thanos, and he said, "Hey, convert my stuff to bonus so I could be because I'm free at the end of the year." I know y'all never want me to hit that note again. That is not something I'm good at. I do a lot of things. I consider myself a Renaissance man. I may have even painted some of those murals in the back. However, hitting that high note ain't something I do very well. So I won't do that again. I don't know how that sounded on these headsets, but I would imagine even these high tech headsets could not make that sound good. Sorry about that. So again, recapping these five guys. Cedric Tillman, Jamari Thrash, two guys at the receiver position, going to have a tough time to make it, especially with the young studs we brought in like Concepcion and Boston. And we still got Judy, who MKC believes in, but I rather believe in what MGK tells me. Machine Gun Kelly about the Browns football. They're just giving you a hard time, Mary. Zach Zinner, offensive lineman from Michigan, originally by way of Michigan. Actually, I believe he's actually from Ohio originally, but we had to do some additional research from that. However, he may not even make the team this year. So maybe that's another team's fan base will do the research on Zinter at that point because they'd be excited to get him. I actually do think he's a solid offensive lineman as a interior backup lineman, right? Offensive guard off center that you can use. Wimpler, same thing. I'm not advocating that these guys shouldn't make it. I'm just saying as we start to count down the offensive line, in a little bit, we'll see that it's going to get tough for all three of these guys to make it, as well as Dewan Jones, who is a little bit more likely to make it than maybe those other two I just mentioned, just simply because of the fact that I mean at this point you get paid 1 million, right? And I don't think it's a cap hit. I think it actually will be easy for them to cut him, but I think we're in a lot better position now, obviously, with the offensive line, which I talked about a lot in this offseason, where we don't have to depend on Dewan Jones to be healthy. Maybe as a swing tackle, he might be a little bit better. I remember I had a lot of people, Ohio State fans, tell me as he came into the league, like, hey, I don't know if you want to be that excited about that guy. He's 6'8", 374, but at the same time, he can't bend, and he just looks like Tarzan plays like Jane. And I'm still hoping that, for example, he could get re-signed and be a starting right tackle for the Browns moving forward. That's still a possibility, but it's just not a likelihood, right? We can't depend on that. We can't put all our eggs in that basket. I use a lot of cliches in life, and that is so apt to this, situation. There's other positions where it's like, okay, we've got enough depth now that we don't have to depend on guys like that. Jerry Judy is a good example. We talked about the receiver position a lot, right? Even throughout this show. We'll transition on from that. Defensive line is obviously going to be experiencing some flux. We'll be expecting the defensive tackle position to contribute more, whether it's a Mason Graham, whether it's a Michael Hall Jr. We're going to talk about Michael Hall Jr. Whether it's a Malik Collins, we're just hoping that he can maybe produce at even somewhat of the same level he did last year. Can acquire Khalid Davis is obviously from San Francisco at the defensive tackle position. But obviously, we lost Miles Garrett. So there's no replacing that, even with a guy like Jared Verse and his leadership. Again, you look at Jared Verse has 12 career sacks. Miles Garrett had 23 last year alone. So there's going to be a lot of, I don't know, it's going to be a hole. There's going to be a lot of opportunity for guys to step up. Now, somebody that has to step up or get dropped off is Michael Hall Jr. Now, again, maybe not in jeopardy of not making the 53 because he's still only 21 years old going into his third year in the league, right? He's still a very young player. However, his play has been less than exceptional. Really, it's been non-existent. He missed last year with I don't know. He was coming back from a leg injury, and I was expecting that he might be back by like say week 3 or week 4. It just kept dragging on, and I think we were about halfway to the season until I think maybe he started practicing around that point. And again, we didn't get a lot from him last year. The year before, again, like in his first season, he was dealing with a legal issue, and then it was the knee issue that took him out the next year that he's recovering from in his third year. So again, he hasn't been able to give us anything, and if that's the indication of what you get from in the future, you're definitely not looking at re-signing him long term. I would say while he's still young, you would want to explore, just like, for example, a Cedric Tillman, any trade value you get at a Michael Hall Jr. Maybe starting at around a fourth round draft pick, as he was a second round draft pick. He just doesn't have the numbers. He didn't have the numbers in college. What I mean by production, right? Staying on the field, being available. I realize you're a defensive tackle, but you got to at least log snaps, right? So with Michael Hall Jr., whether he makes the 53 or whether the team explores a trade, which I don't think there'd be a lot of trade interest, I do think that that will be something that, again, there's bigger names that I hear, trade this guy, trade that guy, especially again, Wars one. I don't like that at all. You can't really get value at him at this point in his career. And I hate to even put it in simple terms like that, but yeah, it's like that. I mean, I'm somebody that I explained to you, I think even in the last show. I take basically pride in making a dollar out of 15 cents. So you can't tell me why you got a Hall of Fame player like Award. I'm trying not to go on a rant and stay focused because I only got one more player to bring you. You're going to basically get pennies on the dollar trading him because at some point he did have multiple first round draft pick trade value, right? He does not have that anymore. He's been a top 5 corner in the league. This is debatable, but I mean, I don't wanna really debate cornerback play with a lot of people because I think I know what I'm talking about, right? And so he's been a very good cornerback in the league, if not great, if not having a Hall of Fame career. One of the best in the league for quite a while. You don't ship that guy for a third round pick to Detroit. That's crazy. That's crazy. Just stop talking about that, man. Y'all stop talking about that. That's irresponsible journalism. All right, last one. Dylan Gabriel. We talked about him early in the show. I mean, I don't even know that I got to talk about him much more. We know that the starting quarterback position right now is between, Shador seems to be the future. Calls himself legendary. I call him Showtime Sanders. They call him S2. Got a lot of names. Or between Derek, that's what his mama named him. Deshaun, that's what y'all know him as. My cousin calls him Massage. I don't know where that came from. I don't know what that's based off of. But I'll tell you one thing. Dylan Gabriel's not really in that competition. So whether it is again the Browns explored a trade at the last moment, and even the Jets were have rumored to have interest, but that was when Geno Smith was still trying to basically lay low because he didn't want to see his face on a wanted poster. No, okay. All right, maybe I'm exaggerating a little bit. They dropped the Chargers. We talked about that. Let me stop mentioning that. Basically, the Jets aren't as in need as they were last week. That's the gist of that. And then Arizona Cardinals, for example, they're going to be in need. Um, but what are they willing to offer? Is for example, Dylan Gabriel, does he have trade value over a fourth round draft pick? No, but you know, suckers born every minute. Something's worth what somebody will pay for it. I got no more cliches for today. Actually, I got a whole bunch of them, but I ain't gonna hit y'all with no more cliches. I did hit y'all with who I thought would not make the 53-man roster for the Browns, or is very much in jeopardy of not making it. Right. So gave you about seven guys. I don't even know if I can count at this point. Six guys. So five in a possible. That's not too bad. It's not like I was giving you 12 people. In fact, let me see if I can give you guys one more off top of the head that I really didn't have originally on the show. This is like the bonus part. I could maybe edit this out afterward, but who else? Who else? Now Malachi Corley would just be like a kind of a layup game. We talking about how deep the receiver position is. However, hmm, I, I don't know. I can't think of anybody else. I think that's a pretty healthy list. I think that was a pretty healthy list. I can't see like I'm thinking like one of the defensive ends not making it. We're so thin there. Linebacker, same thing. I mean, maybe like a Buki Watson, right? Buki Watson got drafted a couple years ago, fifth round draft pick for the Browns out of I believe it's Mississippi State. So he's SEC guy. Got hurt last year. Again, mainly played special teams for us. We could use linebacker help. I thought this guy might be able to give us some defensive snaps, but he's pretty much shown he's just a special teamer. We could use some just a special teamer guys, but he'd have to stay healthy. So if I was going to add one more name on there, it's Nathaniel Buki Watson. All right. So hey, if y'all got any anything else that y'all want to get at me about, anything else you'd like to hear about on the next show, any topics you'd like for us to cover before training camp starts or before we get into the preseason, just let me know. Hit me up. I told you, you can even text me, call 937-355-2137. You know, it's your boy, Rudy, bringing you Browns only, the way only I can. So I hope you enjoyed it. Now, don't be expected if those guys are not on the opening day active 53-man roster, because I just told you. All right. So believe what I say. I'll see y'all next time. Always love bringing y'all the show. Talk to you soon. And always, go Browns.